Chayton stopped the wagon in front of the broken corral and stayed quiet for several seconds, long enough for the children to realize what was happening before he spoke. "You'll stay here," he said, his tone flat, not angry anymore, just tired. He climbed down, tossed the small bundle of clothes to the ground, and looked away from Ayana's face. "The land is cursed. Let it take you if it wants." He climbed back on, slapped the reins, and the wagon rolled away. The sound of the wheels faded before the wind arrived, leaving silence that felt almost deliberate, like a door closing. Ayana didn't cry. The children did, quietly, the way children cry when they don't want to make things worse. She put her hand on each of their shoulders and made them turn toward the corral. The fences leaned, the trough was dry, the cabin half collapsed. It didn't matter. "This is where we start," she whispered, though her voice broke on the last word. She pushed the cabin door open with her shoulder. Inside, the floor was covered with straw and broken glass. She cleared a small corner, spread their blanket, and told the children to sit. When she turned, her eyes caught the shape of a basket near the wall, made of willow, its handle cracked but still strong. It was the kind her mother used when collecting herbs along the creek. She lifted it, cleaned it with the edge of her skirt, and set it beside the children. It would hold what they had left: bread, a tin cup, 2 small shirts. While the children ate the last of the bread, she went outside to find anything that would burn. She gathered twigs and a few dry stalks of grass, struck flint, and waited for the flame to catch. The light was weak, but it gave the children warmth and something to look at that wasn't emptiness. When the fire steadied, she sat beside them, not speaking. The boy, Keone, asked if their father would come back. She said yes, because the truth would have been heavier than the night. After they slept, she walked behind the corral, where the well was covered with stones and weeds. She pushed the stones aside with both hands and leaned over the rim. The darkness inside seemed endless. She lowered a small piece of rope she found near the fence, and when she pulled it back wet, she smiled without meaning to. Water meant the ground still listened. She pressed her palm against the stone and whispered, "If this land remembers pain, it will remember care." Her breath fogged against the cold edge, and for the first time she felt the words were not hers alone. Something below them moved, a sound, a shift, maybe just her heartbeat, but it was enough. She covered the well again, went back to the cabin, and sat beside the fire until dawn. When the first light reached through the cracks of the roof, she stood and looked around. Everything was broken, but the air felt different, as if it had agreed to her promise. She picked up the willow basket, brushed off the ashes that had fallen on it during the night, and said quietly, "We begin here." The words stayed in the room after she left, settling into the walls like new foundations. The morning after her vow, Ayana woke before the children. The fire had died to ash, but the air carried the faint smell of smoke, something that felt alive enough to keep her steady. She stepped outside, barefoot, her skirt brushing against the dry grass, and stood by the well again. The stones were still damp from the night. She knelt, tied the same thin rope to the tin cup, and lowered it slowly, counting the turns around her hand. When it reached the bottom, she waited, listening. The sound came back faint but real, a small, soft splash. She pulled it up, and when the first drops spilled over her fingers, she felt the ground give its answer. She filled the children's mouths before her own. The water tasted of iron and stone, but it was cold, pure, and enough. That day she began to search for what could be used. She found the handle of a broken hoe, half a coil of wire, a cracked pot buried in the dirt, and a torn piece of canvas she could use as a curtain. She gathered them all in the willow basket, each item placed carefully, like they were more than objects, like they were proof that she could still build. The children followed her, silent but watching. She gave them small tasks: collect sticks, pick smooth stones, sweep the dirt floor. She spoke little, only enough to guide them. The rhythm of movement replaced the noise of fear. When the sun rose high, they sat under the edge of the fence and ate what little bread remained. Ayana divided the last piece into 3 and smiled when the children insisted she take the larger one. "Tomorrow we'll eat better," she said, without knowing how, but needing to hear it spoken aloud. In the afternoon, she walked toward the ridge where the grass grew higher, searching for herbs. She recognized the sharp smell of wild sage and cut it carefully, remembering how her mother once said sage keeps away sickness and sadness. She filled the basket until it was heavy, carried it back to the cabin, and hung small bundles above the doorway. The scent filled the room, fresh and grounding. Later, she made a fire outside and burned a handful, letting the smoke circle the children as they slept. It wasn't ceremony. It was gratitude. Before sleeping, she sat with the willow basket on her lap, fixing the crack with thin strands of bark, repeating her mother's lesson. You repair what still has use. You don't curse what can be mended. The wind changed direction as she worked, bringing the smell of rain from far off. She didn't believe in miracles, but she believed in signs, and that was enough. She looked at the well one last time before going inside. It seemed different now, less like a hole, more like a heart. When the first drop of rain finally fell, she didn't move. She let it hit her face and roll down, a quiet confirmation that the promise she made was heard. In the distance, thunder rolled without threat, only as reminder. Tomorrow she would walk to the agency post, see what could be traded, and learn how to make the land feed them. Tonight, though, she whispered to the water through the open door, "We will take care of you if you take care of us." The night took the words and carried them somewhere deep. Inside, the children slept without stirring, and the basket rested near the fire, half open, waiting to be filled again. 3 days after the rain, Ayana saw a figure on the horizon, small and slow, moving with the patience of someone who knows every inch of the land. She watched until the shape became an old man leading a thin mule, its coat gray with dust. He stopped a few steps from the corral and lifted his hand in greeting. Not speech, just respect. "Ayana," he said softly, like he was remembering her name rather than learning it. She hadn't heard it spoken in weeks. The children stood behind her, half afraid, half curious. The man's hair was white, braided with leather strips darkened by years of sweat. "Matto," he said, touching his chest. The sound carried familiarity, as if the land itself already knew him. He had been a hunter once, before the buffalo were taken. Now he herded goats near the ridge, living off trade and the memory of movement. He looked at the corral, the half-mended roof, the bundles of sage hanging by the doorway. "You've chosen the hardest ground," he said, not in judgment, but in fact. Ayana nodded. "It chose me." He smiled, showing a few missing teeth. "Then you'll do well. Hard ground doesn't lie." He walked around, studying everything. When he saw the children's small footprints near the well, he grunted with approval. "Water that listens to little feet will never go bad," he said. From his mule, he pulled a small cloth sack and handed it to her. Inside were beans, a small piece of salt, and something alive, an old goat, tethered by a thin rope, its eyes patient, its coat patchy but strong. "Her name is Ashki," he said. "She's old, like me, but she still gives." Ayana didn't know what to say. He placed the rope in her hand and added, "Feed her kindness. Not pity. The milk will know the difference." The children touched the goat carefully, amazed at the warmth under their fingers. That night Matto sat by their fire, eating slowly, telling stories between silences. He spoke of the time when rivers ran clean and people followed the herds, when no one thought of land as cursed. He showed Ayana how to cut grass for feed, how to check the hooves, and how to mix herbs into milk to keep it sweet. "Everything living is a teacher," he said, staring into the flames, "even the things that die." When the children fell asleep, he lowered his voice. "Your husband doesn't understand the land. He fears what doesn't answer quickly. The earth doesn't curse us. It waits." Ayana listened, but said nothing. She knew he was right. When Matto left the next morning, he pointed to the willow basket near her feet. "Keep filling it," he said. "When it stays full, you'll know the curse was only hunger." Then he mounted his mule and rode toward the rising sun. The goat bleated once, as if agreeing. Later that day, Ayana milked Ashki for the first time. The stream was thin, hesitant, but warm, and it filled the tin cup with a promise larger than its size. She handed it to Tala and Keone, watched them drink, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not pride, not relief, but the quiet understanding that beginnings often hide inside small, tired bodies. As the day ended, she sat by the well, watching the goat chew slowly, and whispered, "You're part of us now." The wind carried the sound toward the hills where Matto had gone. For the first time, the corral didn't look like a prison. It looked like a plan. Winter left without snow, but with enough cold to make every breath sting. The mornings came white with frost, the nights long and thin, and every sound seemed louder against the silence of the plain. Ayana woke before dawn each day, lighting a small fire, checking Ashki's shelter, and carrying water from the well with her willow basket balanced against her hip. The goat's belly had grown heavy, her steps slower. Grandfather Matto had said she would give birth before the moon changed, and he had been right about everything so far. On the fourth night of the coldest week, Ayana heard a soft cry outside. Not quite pain, not quite fear. She grabbed the blanket, stepped into the dark, and found Ashki lying in the straw, trembling, her body slick with effort. The stars above were bright and sharp as ice. Ayana knelt beside her and whispered what she remembered from Matto's stories, how the earth helps those who don't look away. She rubbed the goat's neck, steadied her breathing, and waited. It didn't take long. A small body slid free, glistening, weak, searching for air. The little thing kicked once, then again, and bleated, a high, fragile sound that split the night. The children woke and came running. "What is it?" Tala asked, her voice shaking. Ayana lifted the newborn into her hands, felt its heartbeat against her palms, fast and alive. "A daughter," she said quietly. Keone reached out, touched its ear, and smiled for the first time since their father left. "She's ours?" Ayana nodded. "She belongs to the land, like us." They cleaned the newborn with old cloth, fed Ashki warm water, and watched until the small goat stood on her thin legs, unsteady but proud. "Spirit," Ayana said. The name came without thought, as if the ground had whispered it first. From that night, the corral no longer felt empty. The small bleating of Spirit became part of every morning, a new rhythm that carried through their work. Ayana began saving every drop of milk she could, mixing it with herbs Matto had taught her to find. The smell filled the cabin. Sharp, earthy, alive. She stored the milk in clay jars, cooled them near the well, and waited. When the first curds formed, she didn't believe it. The taste was strong, salty, better than anything they had eaten in weeks. She shared it with the children, laughing at their surprise. The willow basket, once a container for scraps, now held something that came from their hands. Later, when a trader from the agency stopped by on his way to the fort, Ayanna offered him the small round of cheese, wrapped in willow bark the way Mato had shown her. He turned it over in his hands, sniffed it, and placed 2 silver coins on the table. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever held. With that money, she bought 3 hens and a small bag of corn. That night she sat beside the fire, counting the coins again and again, not for their value, but because they proved she could turn what was once pity into work, what was once ruin into growth. The goat slept near the cabin door, her baby curled against her. The wind moved softly through the posts of the corral, no longer howling but humming, almost gentle. Ayanna looked at the sleeping children and whispered, "We'll never be hungry again." The words didn't sound like a wish anymore. They sounded like a plan the earth had already accepted. Spring came slowly, as if testing whether the land was ready to live again. The frost thinned. Small patches of green appeared near the well, and the sound of water trickling inside it grew louder each morning. Ayanna used the extra light to work longer, mending fences and gathering herbs to sell at the agency post. The hens began to lay. Spirit grew strong, and milk became part of every meal. Yet Ayanna knew they couldn't live on milk and herbs forever. They needed trade. She tied her hair with a strip of hide, filled her willow basket with wrapped cheese, and walked the 10 miles to the trading post with Tala and Keone at her side. The road was long but quiet, broken only by the sound of their steps on dry soil. The agency store was nearly empty now, just a few barrels and shelves covered in dust. A man behind the counter ignored her until another voice called from the back, firm but gentle, asking what she needed. A woman stepped forward, her hair the color of chestnut bark, her dress half mission cloth, half tribal beadwork. "I'm Wahila," she said. "You're from the ridge." Ayanna nodded and showed her the small round of cheese wrapped in willow bark. Wahila studied it carefully, opened it, took a small piece, and tasted. For a moment she said nothing, only closed her eyes, then smiled. "This is good. Clean. You made this?" Ayanna nodded again. Wahila called the man from behind the counter. "This woman's cheese is better than anything we've had from the fort," she said. The man hesitated, then weighed the round on a rusty scale and offered 2 coins. Wahila stopped his hand. "It's worth 5. The man frowned but paid. When he left, Wahila turned to Ayanna and said, "You need fair trade, not charity. Bring more next week. I'll help you set the prices." Ayanna thanked her, unsure what to say to someone who spoke like both worlds belonged to her. Over the next weeks, they met often. Wahila taught her how to weigh goods properly, how to use paper and marks to track trades, and how to refuse an unfair offer without losing respect. "Men talk value," Wahila said once, marking a ledger with her ink pen, "but women know worth. They just forget to write it down." Ayanna listened, learned fast, and began wrapping each cheese in bark with a small braid of sage, her sign. When Wahila brought her to the fort market for the first time, Ayanna kept her head low, but people noticed. They called her the woman from the cursed corral who sold blessings in baskets. Wahila laughed. "Let them talk. Talking spreads faster than wheels." With every trip, Ayanna returned with more than coins, salt, beans, and fabric for the children. She bought a small notebook with blank pages she couldn't yet read, but knew would soon hold her own numbers. Each night she practiced the marks Wahila showed her, carving them in the dirt with a stick until they made sense. The willow basket was always beside her, carrying what she couldn't yet say in words: progress, work, survival. Wahila became not just a partner, but a mirror, proof that bridges could be built between worlds if both sides walked forward. On the last day of that spring, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, Ayana returned home with enough coins to buy seed and a promise to bring twice as much cheese the next time. When the children asked who had helped her, she said simply, "A woman who remembers that fairness is also a kind of strength." The basket rested beside her that night, full of small goods, but heavier with meaning. She touched its rim and whispered, "We're learning the language of the world, one trade at a time." The corral, once silent, now echoed faintly with the future. The summer came harsher than anyone expected. By the end of June, the grass turned pale, the creek dried to a memory, and the wind carried the smell of heat instead of life. Ayana watched the land change, first in small ways. The hens stopped laying as often, Spirit's milk grew thinner, and the air itself seemed to hum with exhaustion. Wahila sent word from the trading post that even the fort was rationing water. Ayana took it as a warning and not a reason to stop. Each morning she measured what remained in the well, counting buckets, teaching the children to never waste even a drop. "Every cup has a story," she told them. "We drink from what remembers us." But the buckets came up lighter every day. When Ashki's steps grew unsteady, Ayana knew she had to act. She walked to the ridge where Mato's goats still grazed what little was left. She found him sitting beneath a dying cottonwood, his mule standing in the shade. "The well is fading," she said simply. Mato nodded, as if he'd been expecting those words. "Then make it remember you again," he said. "Dig until it knows you won't leave." He handed her a worn shovel and the small leather pouch of herbs he always carried. The drought is a test, not of strength, but of promise. That night, when the sky turned copper with dust, Ayana gathered the neighbors who had stayed near the ridge. 3 women, a boy too young to fight, and Suni, the widow who had buried her husband during the last dry season. They stood around the well, faces cracked with fatigue, and began to dig. The sound of metal against stone echoed through the night. Blisters opened on Ayana's hands, blood mixing with dirt, but she kept going. The children carried rocks away in baskets, and Suni poured what little water they had over the tools to keep the air from choking them. By morning, they had reached deeper than anyone remembered. Still nothing. They rested for a few hours and started again. On the second night, as the moon rose thin and trembling, Keone's shovel hit something that sounded different, not stone, not clay. Ayana knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. There was a faint hum, a breath moving under the earth. She struck once more, and a thin line of water seeped between the cracks. The others gasped, too tired to cheer. Ayana reached down, cupped her hands, and brought the water to her lips. It was cold, clean, and tasted like the inside of the world. She lifted her face and whispered, "You remember?" By sunrise, the well was open again, its shadow long across the yard. Ayana named it the teaching well, the way Mato would have. They built a pulley from branches, tied new rope, and covered the rim with smooth stones. She gathered everyone together and spoke in the same calm tone she used with her children. "No one owns this water. We share it, we guard it, and it will guard us." They nodded, understanding what it meant. When Wahila arrived 2 days later and saw the new water, she said, You dug into the earth's heart. Ayana only smiled. No, she answered. We reminded it of ours. In the weeks that followed, the drought continued to burn the plains, but people began to visit the corral, not to trade, but to draw water. Every stranger left with a filled bucket and a quiet word of thanks. The well became a meeting place, a reason to hope. Ayana no longer counted the buckets. She counted faces. Every drop was proof that care, not fear, was what the earth had wanted all along. When the wind finally cooled in early autumn, the first green shoots returned near the edge of the trough. The land had survived, and so had they. The drought ended slowly, the way a wound closes without ceremony. The rains returned one afternoon without warning, thin at first, then heavy enough to turn the dust into mud. People from nearby camps came to the well Ayana had reopened, carrying empty buckets, their eyes tired but grateful. She shared freely, never asking for payment. The well keeps us alive if we keep each other alive, she said. Among the faces that arrived that week was a woman she didn't recognize, young, with her hair bound in a single loose braid, her dress torn from travel. A child no older than 3 clung to her hip, both of them soaked through from the rain. She introduced herself simply. Suni, I came from Rosebud. My husband died in the sickness. We walked until we found water. Her voice carried no begging, only exhaustion. Ayana nodded and pointed to the fire pit. You can stay here until you find your place, she said. But Suni didn't leave. In the days that followed, she helped patch the roof, carried water for the goats, and made sure the hens were fed. She never waited for instruction, and she never complained. One night, as they sat by the fire while the children slept, Ayana asked, You're not planning to move on, are you? Suni shook her head. There's nowhere else to go, she said, and nowhere else that feels like it's still breathing. Ayana understood. From then on, they worked side by side. Suni was fast with her hands, strong with her back, and quiet in her resolve. Together they cleaned the old smokehouse that Matto had helped build before the drought, and turned it into a place to dry cheese and herbs. They gathered sage and wild mint after each rain, binding them with string and hanging them in the cabin until the air smelled of healing. Wahila began to bring buyers from the fort who wanted not only cheese but soap and herbs. Ayana refused to raise prices too high, saying, We're not selling survival, we're sharing it. Suni laughed the first time she heard that. You sound like Matto, she said, and Ayana didn't deny it. The children followed their rhythm. Tala helped wrap cheeses. Keone learned to measure and write the marks Wahila had taught. The work gave them all a reason to wake early. When Wahila saw what the women had built, she said, You've made something bigger than trade. You've made an example. And that was true. Other women from nearby families began to visit, curious to learn. Ayana showed them how to make soap from lard and ash, how to ferment milk with herbs, how to weave baskets from fresh willow shoots. They came every few days until the corral filled with movement, chatter, and the smell of work. The children called it the hands place. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted everything gold, Suni watched Ayana cleaning the well's rim and said quietly, You know, he'd never believe this if he saw it. Ayana didn't have to ask who he was. He will see it, she said, but by then it won't matter. They both smiled, the kind of small, tired smile shared by people who've learned to trust the day more than the promise of anyone returning. That night, the sound of laughter carried farther than usual, reaching the ridge where Matto's goats grazed. Even the land seemed to listen. The corral that once belonged to traders had become something else entirely, a home, a workshop, a heartbeat in the middle of what others had called cursed. The women wove new baskets late into the night, their hands moving fast, their talk soft. Ayana looked at them, at Suni, at her children asleep by the fire, and felt something she hadn't felt since before Chaitan left. Safety, not from danger, but from despair. She reached for her old willow basket, now stained from years of use, and whispered, "We're not surviving anymore. We're living." The words didn't echo. They stayed, warm and steady, like the light from the fire that refused to go out. 5 years passed before his shadow crossed the ridge again. By then, the corral no longer looked like the place he had abandoned. Fences stood firm, baskets hung from hooks near the cabin door, smoke curled softly from the cheese house, and laughter replaced silence. Ayana was at the well when she saw him first, a rider slouched in the saddle, moving like a man uncertain of his welcome. The mule was thin, the man thinner, but she knew the shape of his shoulders even before he spoke her name. Ayana. The sound of it was enough to still the air for a heartbeat. She didn't answer right away, didn't move closer. The children, now taller, stood behind her, wary, as if the earth itself had paused to see what she would do. He dismounted slowly, almost falling as his boots hit the ground, and she realized how much time had carved him down. His face was rough with sun and regret, his hands trembling from weakness or shame. She couldn't tell which. "You did this?" he asked, looking around as if the land had betrayed him by blooming in his absence. "You kept this alive?" Ayana met his eyes for the first time in years. "We didn't keep it alive," she said. "We brought it back." Chaitan stepped closer, stopped at the edge of the fence, and dropped his gaze. "I was wrong," he said. "About the curse, about you. I thought the land hated me, so I hated it back. It took everything to teach me." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "I came to ask for forgiveness." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of warm milk from the smokehouse and wet clay from the well. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned to Tala and Keone and told them to bring him water. When the boy handed him a tin cup, Chaitan hesitated before drinking, as if unsure he deserved even that. "You can rest here," Ayana said, her tone steady. "There's food by the fire, but when the sun rises, you'll ride on. The lodge isn't for you anymore." His eyes filled, and for a moment she saw the man he had been before bitterness hollowed him out. "You're right," he whispered. "I have nowhere to go." She looked at him without cruelty. "Then start where you left yourself." He nodded, understanding the weight of what she wasn't saying. That night, he sat by the fire outside, wrapped in a borrowed blanket while the others slept. Ayana stayed awake, watching through the doorway. He ate little, spoke less, staring at the flames as if they were judging him. Before dawn, he left the cup near the well and walked toward the horizon. His steps slow, his back bent like the broken posts he had once left behind. When the sun rose, only his footprints remained, already fading into the dust. Ayana stood where he had been and whispered, "Go in peace, but don't come back empty again." She covered the well, turned toward the house, and saw Suni waiting at the door. "He's gone," Suni said. "Yes," Ayana replied, "and now the curse has gone with him." That day, work began as usual. Milk, cheese, trade, but the air carried a new stillness, not sorrow, not triumph, something quieter, like a space finally cleared. When Wahila visited that evening, she noticed the difference. "You look lighter," she said. Ayana smiled faintly. "Forgiveness is heavy only until you give it away." As night settled, she placed her old willow basket beside the fire, filled it with herbs and cheese for tomorrow's market, and covered it with cloth. The same basket that once held their last scraps now carried the work of many hands, the proof that nothing holy had ever left this ground. She sat back, the flames reflecting in her eyes, and for the first time in years, she let herself rest without listening for footsteps that might return. By the time the next spring came, the well had become more than a source of water. It was a gathering place, a symbol that people carried stories about. Word of Ayana's work reached the council, and one morning a messenger arrived from the nearest settlement, saying the elders wanted her presence at the spring fair to speak about how she had rebuilt the cursed corral. Ayana hesitated. She had never thought of herself as someone others would listen to. But Wahila insisted, saying, "You gave the land back its name. It's time the people know what that means." For days, everyone prepared. The children cleaned baskets, Suni packed wrapped cheeses in leaves, and even Mato, now slower but still strong, carved new handles for the cheese molds. When the morning of the gathering came, they loaded a small wagon with goods and followed the trail that wound past the river. The fair was larger than anything Ayana had seen since her childhood. Dozens of tents and stalls filled the meadow, the air heavy with the smell of meat cooking and cedar smoke. Drums pulsed like steady heartbeats under the sound of voices. People came from every direction. Families from the ridge, traders from the fort, soldiers' wives with cloths to barter. Wahila found a place for their table beneath a cottonwood, and Ayana began to arrange the willow baskets in neat rows. Each one was filled with the work of many hands, rounds of cheese wrapped in bark, bars of soap tied with string, herbs sealed in cloth pouches. Her children stood proudly beside her, explaining the process to anyone who asked. When Mato arrived, leaning on his carved staff, the crowd made space for him. "This is the woman I told you about," he said loudly, his voice rough but proud. "The one who turned dead ground into life." Applause followed, not wild, just steady, honest. Ayana felt heat rise in her chest. She wasn't used to eyes on her. Wahila whispered, "When they ask you to speak, tell the truth, nothing else." Soon the council's elder, a man with white braids and a calm face, called her forward. The crowd quieted. The drums stopped. Ayana stepped up, her palms damp, her heart measured like hooves in dirt. She didn't use ceremony. She just spoke. They said no woman could heal cursed land, but the land was never cursed. It was waiting. It remembered the ones who listened. She paused, her voice catching. "When my husband left, I thought the earth hated me. I thought work was punishment. But every day I dug, it gave back a little more. Water, grass, milk, people. Forgiveness doesn't fall from the sky. It grows where you plant care." She held up her old willow basket. "This carried our last meal once. Now it carries the work of many hands. That's what healing looks like." The crowd stayed silent for a long moment. Then someone began to drum softly, slow and deep, and others joined in. The sound filled the meadow. People began to buy, not just out of need, but respect. Wahila handed out coins and smiled at her friend. Mato leaned close and said, "When the well runs dry again someday, they'll remember who taught them to dig." Ayana looked at the people moving among the stalls and thought of all the faces she had met. The widows, the traders, the children who came for water, and felt something settle inside her. A calm, stronger than pride. That night, after the fair ended and fires dotted the horizon, she sat by the wagon counting the baskets left unsold. There weren't many. She didn't care. What mattered was that the work had become larger than her name. The land, the well, and the people were now one story, She closed her eyes and whispered, "We kept our promise." The drums still carried through the night, faint but steady, like a heartbeat that would not fade. Years passed, marked not by hardship anymore, but by the quiet rhythm of seasons that finally kept their promises. The cursed corral had become a village of work and laughter, a place people spoke of with reverence when they mentioned Ayana's name. The well never ran dry again. Its water fed the gardens and animals that had multiplied beyond anything she once imagined. Goats grazed freely across the ridge, hens filled baskets with eggs, and children played along the fence where silence used to live. The cooperative that had started with 3 women now counted 20, each with their own small herd, their own willow basket, their own story of how life had returned. Wahila still rode from the fort every few weeks, bringing paper and ink and the kind of news that belonged to both worlds. She helped the women form a proper trade ledger, one that would allow them to sell cheese and herbs across 3 territories. Mato was too weak to visit often now, but he sent messages carried by young herders who called him grandfather. He would always ask, "Does the well still sing?" And Ayana would send back word, "Every day." Suni ran the smokehouse now, her son working beside her, while Tala taught younger children letters under the shade of the cottonwood. Keone had become Wahila's apprentice, learning to read maps and trade routes, already dreaming of new markets to the south. Their world had grown wider, but Ayana's days remained simple. She woke with the sun, fetched water, touched the rim of the well, and thanked it before starting work. One morning, she found an old feather half buried near the corral gate, the same kind that once hung there when Chayton left. She picked it up, cleaned it, and tied it back to the post, not as a memory of pain, but as a symbol of what had survived it. That evening, as the sky turned copper, she walked slowly through the corral, her steps careful, her heart steady. Everything around her carried proof of their labor, the fences straight, the fields green, the air smelling of milk and firewood. She stopped beside the well, the water glinting softly, and placed her first willow basket beside it. The edges were frayed, the color faded, but it had never broken. She ran her fingers along its rim, remembering the night she had found it abandoned on the cabin floor, when it had held their last meal and her first promise. "You held more than food," she whispered. "You held us." She looked up, and for a moment thought she saw Mato's shadow near the ridge. Standing the way he always had, one hand on his staff, watching without needing to speak. Whether it was memory or spirit, she didn't care. She spoke aloud anyway. "The ground remembers." The words fell naturally, without effort, as if the earth itself was repeating them back. In the distance, children laughed, a dog barked, and goats called for feeding. She smiled, realizing that life had become louder than loss. When night came, the women lit lanterns around the well, their glow forming a circle of gold against the dark. They sang softly, a song about work and renewal, the same melody Mato used to hum when the moon was full. Ayana closed her eyes, listening. The air was warm, the ground solid beneath her feet, and for the first time she truly believed the land was at peace. The spirits had never left. They had only waited for hands that would not take, but tend. And now those hands were many. She lifted the basket one last time, set it carefully on the stones beside the well, and whispered, "We remember too." The wind rose, gentle and constant, carrying her voice across the plain as if delivering it back to the beginning. When the dawn came, the light touched everything she had built, and the cursed ground finally looked like what it had always been. Home. She didn't keep the penny because it was worth something. She kept it because it reminded her what worth truly means. If the person who left you came back with nothing, would you forgive or walk away?